Let me paint you a picture. It is a Tuesday evening. You are sitting at your kitchen table. You have a decent job. You own a car. Maybe you are renting an apartment, or perhaps you're still paying off a mortgage. By every traditional definition, you're middle class. But here's what the numbers say. Your rent has gone up 31% in the last 4 years. Your groceries cost 40% more than they did in 2020. Your health insurance premium just increased again. And your salary, it went up maybe 3% last year if you were lucky. You are working harder than your parents did, and somehow you are falling further behind. This is not a personal failure. This is a structural dismantling. According to research from the Pew Research Center, the American middle class has shrunk from 61% of adults in 1971 to just 50% today. Half a century of erosion. And based on the economic forces currently accelerating in 2025, that trend is not slowing down. It is speeding up. A landmark study from the Federal Reserve's own data shows that the bottom 80% of Americans by wealth now hold less than 9% of total national wealth. The top 1% holds more than 32%, and the gap is widening every single quarter. 78% of middle-class households are currently one financial emergency away from genuine economic crisis. One job loss, one medical bill, one car breakdown. That is not a statistic. That is most of the people watching this video right now. And what I am going to show you today is not just why this is happening. I am going to show you the 4-stage system being used to dismantle the middle class deliberately and methodically, and what you can do before 2028 to make sure you are not part of that statistic. Stay with me because this one matters. Before I walk you through history, I need to give you the map, because once you understand this 4-stage framework, you will stop seeing your financial struggles as personal problems. You will start seeing them as the entirely predictable result of a system operating exactly as designed. I call it the 4 stages of the middle class squeeze. Stage 1, the debt dependency trap. Stage 2, the wage illusion. Stage 3, the asset lockout. Stage 4, the extinction event. Let me walk you through each one, and pay close attention because you are going to recognize your own life in these stages. Stage 1 is the debt dependency trap. This is where it begins. The middle class is slowly, methodically converted from a wealth-building class into a debt-servicing class. Instead of owning assets, they are encouraged through culture, advertising, and policy to borrow money to maintain a lifestyle they can no longer actually afford on wages alone. Think of it like a slow leak in a boat. You keep bailing water, convinced you're staying afloat, but you are not moving forward. You are just exhausted. Micro example. In 1980, total American consumer debt, excluding mortgages, was approximately $300 billion. Today, according to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, total consumer debt has crossed $17 trillion. That includes credit, cards, auto loans, student debt, and personal loans. The average American household now carries over $11,000 in total debt. That is not prosperity. That is a cage with a monthly payment. Stage 2 is the wage illusion. Salaries go up on paper. Politicians celebrate record employment. News anchors talk about wage growth, and technically, wages are higher in dollar terms than they were 20 years ago. But here's the trap. When you adjust those wages for actual inflation, not the official government CPI number, but the real cost of housing, healthcare, childcare, and education, real purchasing power for middle-income workers has been nearly flat or negative for decades. It is like being given a raise that is smaller than your rent increase. You feel like you're earning more, but you can afford less. Micro example. In 1975, the median American worker could buy a median-priced home for approximately 4 times their annual income. Today, in 2025, the ratio in most major American cities is between 8 and 12 times annual income. The math has not just gotten harder, it has become structurally impossible for a significant portion of the middle class. Stage 3 is the asset lockout. This is perhaps the cruelest stage. Just when the middle class most needs to build wealth through asset ownership, real estate, stocks, small businesses, the price of entry to those assets is deliberately elevated beyond reach. While middle-class families are trapped in the debt dependency stage, large institutional investors are buying the very assets that used to be middle-class on-ramps to wealth. Single-family homes, small apartment buildings, local commercial properties. Micro example. In 2012, institutional investors owned approximately 2% of single-family rental homes in America. By 2030, according to projections from the MetLife Investment Management Report, institutional investors could control 40% of single-family rentals in the United States. A generation ago, buying a home was how a middle-class family built generational wealth. Today, buying a home in many markets has become a privilege of the already wealthy. Stage 4 is the extinction event. This is the end game. When enough middle-class families are sufficiently debt-loaded, wage-stagnated, and asset-locked, it only takes a single economic shock, a recession, a job market disruption, a healthcare crisis, to permanently remove them from middle-class status entirely. And here is the brutal reality. Most of them never recover. Research from the Urban Institute shows that families who fall out of the middle class during a recession take an average of 11 years to return to their previous income level, if they ever do. And with each successive economic cycle, the ladder back up gets one rung shorter. Now let me show you this has happened before, multiple times with increasing severity. Example 1. The deindustrialization of the 1970s and 1980s, when the first middle class was erased. Most people think of the 1980s as a boom decade, Reagan's economy, morning in America. And for some people, that story is true. But for a very specific slice of the American middle class, the industrial working class in cities like Detroit, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, and Gary, Indiana, the 1970s and 1980s were an extinction event in real time. The key turning point came between 1979 and 1983. During those 4 years, America lost over 2 million manufacturing jobs. Steel mills closed, auto plants downsized. The industrial Midwest, which had produced the most prosperous working middle class in human history, began a structural collapse that has never fully reversed. Here is the hidden detail that almost nobody talks about. The deindustrialization was not purely the result of foreign competition, as it was publicly framed at the time. A significant portion was driven by deliberate capital reallocation decisions made by large American corporations. Companies like U.S. Steel and General Motors found it more profitable to close domestic plants, invest in automation, and shift production to lower-wage environments. Not because they were losing money, but because the profit margins were better elsewhere. The middle-class communities that had been built around these employers for 3 generations were, from the perspective of corporate balance sheets, a cost to be reduced. The unemployment rate in cities like Detroit and Pittsburgh reached above 20% during this period. These were not numbers. These were families. Entire neighborhoods collapsed. Property values fell. Schools defunded. The social infrastructure of the industrial middle class was dismantled in less than a decade. But that was not the worst part. The worst part is that the workers who lost those jobs were told consistently and repeatedly that they just needed to retrain, go to community college, learn new skills, adapt. And while some did and some succeeded, the systematic replacement of an entire class of middle-class employment was framed as personal failure rather than structural betrayal. The narrative protected the system. The workers absorbed the damage. 2. The early 2000s recession, how the middle class lost a decade. The dot-com crash of 2021 is usually told as a story about greedy tech investors getting what they deserved. That framing is convenient and incomplete. The key turning point was not the NASDAQ crash itself. It was the labor market collapse that followed. Between 2001 and 2003, the the United States lost approximately 2.7 million private sector jobs. But unlike previous recessions, these jobs did not come back in the same form. A phenomenon economists later called jobless recovery took hold. GDP began growing again, corporate profits recovered, but middle-class employment did not return to pre-recession levels for years. Here is the hidden detail. During the jobless recovery of 2002 and 2003, corporate America discovered something remarkable. They could generate the same or greater output with fewer workers through a combination of technology outsourcing and what HR departments euphemistically called efficiency restructuring. The productivity gains from eliminating workers went directly to shareholders in executive compensation. Between 2000 and 2007, corporate profits as a share of GDP rose to their highest levels in decades. Worker compensation as a share of GDP fell to its lowest. This was the moment the economic contract between corporations and middle-class workers, the deal that said, if you work hard and stay loyal, you will be taken care of, quietly ended. Most people did not notice it happening in real time. The median American family's net worth peaked in 2007 at approximately $126,000. By 2013, after the financial crisis, it had fallen to approximately $80,000. 10 years of wealth building erased in 2 years. But that was not the worst part. The worst part is that while the middle class was slowly losing ground through 2 recessions in a decade, the financial mechanisms being built in the background, the mortgage-backed securities, the leverage buyout structures, the private equity roll-up strategies, were specifically designed to extract wealth from the middle-class economy and concentrate it at the top. It was not accidental, it was architecture. Example 3. The gig economy transition, how stable jobs became disposable contracts. If the 1980s dismantled the industrial middle class and the early 2000s ended the corporate loyalty compact, then the 2010s delivered the final transformation of what work itself means for middle-class Americans. The key turning point was roughly 2012 to 2015. During this period, a combination of smartphone technology, venture capital investment, and favorable regulatory arbitrage created what became known as the gig economy. Uber, Lyft, TaskRabbit, DoorDash, Amazon Flex. A parade of platforms that turned previously stable, benefit-providing employment into on-demand contract work. The platforms were marketed brilliantly. Be your own boss, choose your own hours, freedom and flexibility. Here's the hidden detail. What these platforms actually did was take jobs that had previously included health insurance, retirement contributions, paid leave, and employment protections, and strip all of those benefits away while keeping the labor itself. A taxi driver in 1990 often had a union card, a pension, and health coverage. An Uber driver in 2020 has none of those things. The work is the same. The economic security is not. A study from J.P. Morgan Chase Institute analyzing bank account data found that gig economy workers experienced income volatility that was more than 4 times higher than traditional employees. Month to month, their incomes were wildly unpredictable. It makes long-term financial planning nearly impossible. By 2023, according to Gallup polling, approximately 36% of American workers participated in the gig economy in some form. The middle-class employment model, stable benefit-providing career track work, had been replaced for tens of millions of Americans with something that looks like employment but functions like economic precarity. The worst part is that the companies building these platforms were valued at tens of billions of dollars precisely because of the cost savings from not treating workers as employees. The wealth created by the gig economy was enormous. I publish this kind of deep analysis every week because everything I just described, those 4 stages, those historical patterns, they are not background history. They are the current operating reality, and the pace is accelerating. Let me map exactly where we are right now. The debt dependency trap is deeper than it has ever been. As of early 2025, American credit card debt has hit a record $1.2 trillion, according to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. The average credit card interest rate has climbed to over 22%, the highest in the history of modern credit card lending. Americans are not using credit cards for luxury purchases. They are using them for groceries, utility bills, and medical expenses. Student loan debt stands at approximately $1.7 trillion. 43 million Americans owe student debt. The average monthly payment for borrowers who are actively repaying is over $500 per month. Auto loan delinquencies, the percentage of car loans where payments are 60 or more days late, reached their highest level since 2010 in 2024. According to Fitch Ratings data, here's the smoking gun on the debt trap. The banking industry's most profitable product in 2024 was not investment banking. It was not mortgages. It was consumer credit card interest and fees. JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, and Citigroup together collected over $70 billion in credit card interest and fees from American consumers in 2024. $70 billion, paid primarily by people who could not afford to pay their balances in full. That is not a lending business. That is a debt harvesting operation. The wage illusion is running at full speed. Officially, wages are up. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reported average hourly earnings growth of approximately 4% in 2024. Politicians on both sides cited this as evidence of a strong economy. But if you pulled up a comparison chart right now showing wage growth versus the actual cost of essentials, not the official CPI, but real housing costs, real grocery costs, real childcare costs, you would see something very different. The National Association of Realtors reported that the monthly mortgage payment on a median-priced American home reached approximately $2,200 in early 2025. In 2020, that same payment was approximately $1,040. It has more than doubled in 5 years. Wages did not double, not even close. Childcare costs in major metropolitan areas now average between $15,000 and $35,000 per year per child. For a family with 2 children, childcare alone can consume 50 to 70% of one parent's entire after-tax income. Here is what mainstream media is consistently missing on this point. The wage growth that gets celebrated in headlines is heavily skewed by gains at the top end of the income distribution. When hedge fund managers and tech executives get massive compensation increases, that raises the average. The median, what the middle worker actually earns, tells a far bleaker story. Median real wages for workers without college degrees have been essentially flat for over 20 years when adjusted for actual living costs. The raise is real. The improvement in living standards it implies is an illusion. The asset lockout is not coming. It is here, and it is escalating faster than most people realize. In the first quarter of 2025, the median home price in the United States remained above $400,000, according to the National Association of Realtors. At current mortgage rates of approximately 6.8%, affording that home requires a household income of approximately $114,000 per year. The median American household income is approximately $78,000. The math does not work. For a growing percentage of the middle class, home ownership, the single most reliable wealth-building vehicle available to ordinary Americans for the last century, has become financially out of reach. And here is the smoking gun that should make every middle-class person sit up. Invitation Homes, a publicly traded company that is the largest single-family rental landlord in the United States, owns approximately 85,000 homes as of 2025. Blackstone's real estate portfolio spans hundreds of thousands of units globally. Progress Residential AMH and a dozen other institutional landlords collectively own hundreds of thousands of additional single-family homes. When you cannot afford to buy because institutional capital has outbid you, you rent. And when institutional landlords own a growing share of the rental stock, your rent goes up at rates that reflect shareholder return expectations, not local wage growth. This is asset lockout operating in real time. Stage 4, what I called the extinction event, is the stage that the data suggests is approaching within the 2026 to 2028 window. And here is why. The trigger conditions are assembling. First, the commercial real estate market in the United States is facing a debt maturity wall of approximately $1 trillion between 2024 and 2026. Office buildings, shopping centers, and apartment complexes purchased at low interest rates are now facing refinancing at dramatically higher rates. Multiple major commercial real estate firms have already defaulted or are in distress. When commercial real estate defaults cascade, they hit regional and community banks hardest, the same banks that serve middle-class businesses and borrowers. Second, the student loan repayment resumption, which began in late 2023 after a multi-year pandemic pause, removed approximately $100 billion per year in spending power from 43 million borrowers. Many of those borrowers are in their prime middle-class earning years, aged 25 to 45. The spending reduction flows directly into reduced consumer demand, which flows into slower business growth, which flows into hiring freezes and eventual layoffs. Third, artificial intelligence and automation are not a future threat to middle-class employment. They are a current one. Goldman Sachs published a research report in 2283 estimating that AI could automate tasks equivalent to 300 million full-time jobs globally. In the United States specifically, a study from MIT and Boston University found that industrial robots alone had already reduced employment and wages in affected communities significantly over the prior 2 decades. Here is the smoking gun that connects all 3 of these factors. McKinsey Global Institute published research in 2023 suggesting that by 2030, between 3 and 14% of all workers globally, potentially up to 375 million people, may need to change occupational categories due to automation. Not update their skills within the same field, change their entire occupational category. And the middle-class occupations most vulnerable are not the ones people expect. It is not just factory workers or truck drivers. It is customer service representatives. It is paralegals. It is accountants. It is radiologists. It is the entire layer of administrative and analytical work that constitutes the modern white-collar middle class. If you pulled up the current AI capabilities chart against the job task composition of middle-class white-collar work, you would see an overlap that is frankly alarming. This is the trajectory toward 2028, and it is why 78% of middle-class households, the ones that are already debt-loaded, already wage-stagnated, already asset-locked, are structurally vulnerable to a downgrade from which recovery becomes statistically unlikely. Now let me address the objections, because I know some of you are pushing back right now. First objection. On the surface, those numbers look okay. But here's the specific counterexample you need to sit with. GDP growth and middle-class prosperity are not the same thing, and they have been increasingly decoupled for decades. The United States economy grew substantially between 1980 and 2023. Corporate profits hit record highs multiple times. The stock market produced extraordinary returns, and simultaneously, the middle class shrank from 61% to 50% of adults. You can have robust GDP growth and a shrinking middle class at the same time. We have been doing exactly that for 40 years. Low unemployment does not tell you whether those jobs pay enough to maintain middle class status. An economy where everyone has 2 part-time gig jobs with no benefits is technically at full employment. It is not middle-class prosperity. Second objection, but education will save the middle class. People just need to get better skills. I want to be careful here because education genuinely matters. But let me give you the counterexample. The college premium, the earnings advantage of having a 4-year degree over not having one, has been declining. And more importantly, the cost of obtaining that credential has exploded. The average cost of a 4-year public university degree has increased over 1,300% since 1978. The average starting salary for a college graduate has risen approximately 19% in the same period, adjusted for inflation. The credential that was supposed to be the middle-class escalator has become, for many people, the first rung of the debt dependency trap. A 23-year-old with $80,000 in student loan debt working an entry-level job at $42,000 per year is not middle class. They are middle-class debt with middle-class aesthetics. Third objection. This sounds like doom and gloom. The people who heard warnings like this before the 2008 crash and acted on them were not the ones who lost everything. They were the ones who were positioned to recover, and in some cases to genuinely advance. What I am describing is not a prediction that your life will fall apart. It is a map of the forces working against you so that you can work around them intelligently. Let me give you the pattern in one sentence. The middle class is being systematically dismantled through a 4-stage process: debt dependency, wage illusion, asset lockout, and a coming extinction event. That is the predictable result of deliberate policy, corporate strategy, and technological disruption. And the window to protect yourself is narrowing. Now, what do you actually do?